You're not blocked. You're obedient. Obedient to a quiet sentence you've been repeating in your chest so long it became your name. And King Solomon warned you about it, but not in the way you think. You wake up every morning believing you want change, yet something inside you keeps choosing the familiar cage. Not because you're weak, because your inner identity has already sworn an oath. There is a thought living in the heart, not loud, not dramatic, just constant, and it has been shaping you while you weren't looking. This is why effort feels cursed. This is why desire feels mocked. The contradiction hurts because it's invisible. Proverbs 23:7 isn't a comfort, it's a verdict. It suggests that the deepest part of you has already decided who you're allowed to be, and life has simply been obeying. Joseph Murphy called this law merciless, impartial, sacred. If that's true, then the question isn't why reality won't change. It's who you've been secretly agreeing to be when no one is listening. There is a moment, small, almost insulting, when you realize the truth has been betraying you quietly. Not in failure, not in catastrophe, but in repetition. The same conversations, the same ceilings stared at in the dark, the same promises whispered with conviction and broken without drama. You told yourself you lacked discipline. You told yourself the timing was wrong. You told yourself you needed more information, more motivation, more confidence, more proof. But beneath those explanations, something else was operating. A contradiction so intimate it felt like you. You wanted change consciously. You wanted freedom intellectually. You wanted expansion emotionally. And yet, when the moment came to choose differently, your body hesitated. Your chest tightened. Your breath shortened. Your attention drifted back to the known pain rather than the unknown possibility. That hesitation wasn't fear. It was loyalty. There is a silent allegiance formed long before words, an agreement you don't remember signing, a vow made without witnesses. And every time you tried to override it with willpower, it responded with exhaustion, confusion, or sabotage, because you weren't fighting resistance. You were violating a contract. This is the part no one tells you. Effort fails not because you lack strength, but because strength cannot overpower identity. You can force behavior for a while. You can white-knuckle routines. You can chant affirmations until your throat aches. But the moment attention slips, the moment fatigue arrives, the moment no one is watching, the old decision resumes control, not as rebellion, as obedience. You don't return to old patterns because you want to. You return because somewhere inside they feel true. And that realization lands like a quiet collapse. Because if effort doesn't work, and desire doesn't work, and knowledge doesn't work, then what exactly has been choosing your life? The painful recognition is not that you are sabotaging yourself. It's that you've been protecting something, an image, a role, a version of you that learned early what was allowed, what was safe, what was survivable, and that version is still at the controls. You can feel it when you almost succeed, and something inside tightens. When opportunity approaches, and your interest fades mysteriously, when momentum builds, and you suddenly crave distraction, comfort, or retreat. That is not coincidence. That is the heart enforcing its jurisdiction. The mind says, I want more. The heart replies, this is who we are. And the heart always wins. Because the heart doesn't argue, it commands. This is why change feels humiliating. Why hope sometimes feels dangerous. Why ambition triggers shame instead of excitement. You are not failing to become someone new. You are succeeding, perfectly, at being who you already agreed to be. And the most unsettling part, you didn't make that agreement consciously. It was shaped in moments of shock, in moments of rejection, in moments when wanting more hurt too much. So you adapted, you shrank expectations, you softened desire, you learned what not to reach for. And the heart, faithful, literal, merciless, recorded it as truth. Now every conscious wish must pass through that truth, and most are denied, not with violence, with indifference. That's why motivation dies overnight. That's why clarity dissolves by morning. That's why you can understand everything and still change nothing, because the hidden problem is not ignorance, it's allegiance. You have been trying to build a future while secretly swearing loyalty to a past identity. And identities do not negotiate, they enforce. There is a grief that surfaces when this becomes clear, A regret not just for what you didn't do, but for how long you've been arguing with yourself instead of listening to what was already decided. And just as that grief begins to form into a question, just as the silence grows heavy, something even more disturbing starts to appear. Because if the heart has already decided, and if life has been obeying that decision, then this isn't just psychological, it's lawful. And laws do not care about your intentions. They only reflect your alignment, and that realization hasn't finished unfolding yet. There is a moment, deep, subterranean, when denial finally loses its grip. It doesn't arrive as panic. It arrives as stillness. A heavy, breathless stillness where excuses no longer echo back with comfort. You see it then, not as a theory, not as a metaphor, but as a lived pattern carved into time. You weren't unlucky. You weren't cursed. You weren't missing some final piece. You were being consistent, painfully consistent. Every desire you chased but never completed. Every breakthrough that stalled just before arrival. Every door that opened and somehow closed from the inside. They weren't random, they were congruent. Congruent with an identity that learned, quietly, efficiently, what was permitted. And now something unsettling rises in the chest. Because if this identity has been governing outcomes, then hope itself has been filtered. You didn't hope freely. You hoped within boundaries. You dreamed only as far as the inner contract allowed. Anything beyond that triggered discomfort, a strange nausea, a tightening, a sense of this isn't me. That phrase, this isn't me, has ended more destinies than failure ever could. And you felt it. When success felt foreign, when confidence felt like impersonation, when ease felt undeserved. You mistook that feeling for humility, for realism, for maturity. But it was something else. It was identity defense, the heart protecting its definition. And here is where the collapse becomes total. Because you realize the self you've been trying to escape is the self you've been unconsciously loyal to. Every time you said, I can't change, every time you joked about your limitations, every time you settled early to avoid disappointment, you weren't resigning, you were reaffirming a sentence spoken long ago in a moment of shock or shame or survival. This is who I am, and the heart believed you. The heart doesn't understand potential. It doesn't understand future selves. It doesn't understand irony or self-criticism. It understands agreement. So when you speak against yourself, even casually, it records it as law. When you think about yourself with quiet contempt, it enforces it as structure. When you expect less, it organizes reality to match. And suddenly the desperation changes flavor. It's no longer the desperation of wanting more. It's the desperation of realizing you've been standing guard over the very prison you hate. That's when regret sharpens. Not regret for missed chances, but for misplaced loyalty, for defending limitations as if they were character traits, for mistaking familiarity for truth, for calling survival identity. And still, no solution appears, only a deeper discomfort. Because if this allegiance lives below awareness, if it was sworn in silence, if it operates automatically, then effort will always arrive too late. Willpower will always be outvoted, and positivity will always feel hollow. This is why forcing change feels violent, why affirmations feel like lies, why motivation collapses under pressure. You've been trying to speak over a verdict issued not by circumstance, but by the heart itself. And the heart doesn't argue with the mind. It commands reality. The terrifying implication settles slowly. If the heart is loyal to an old identity, then life is not resisting you. It's complying. And compliance is far more dangerous than opposition, because opposition can be fought. Compliance feels like fate, and now, standing in that realization, you feel something colder than fear. You feel exposure, as if a mechanism has been glimpsed behind the curtain. As if the world has been responding to something you never knew you were transmitting. And the question forming now isn't comforting, it isn't hopeful, it's destabilizing. If reality has been answering the heart all along, then what exactly has it been hearing? That question does not fade, it waits. And what comes next will not be gentle. There is a reason this realization feels larger than psychology, because what you are touching now is not a habit, not a belief, not even a pattern. It is a law. And laws do not negotiate with preference. They do not reward effort. They do not respond to morality. They do not care if you understand them or not. They operate relentlessly, impartially, silently. As he thinks in his heart, so is he. That sentence was never meant to comfort you. It was meant to expose you. Because the word thinks was never about passing thoughts. Not the noise, not the chatter, not the affirmations you repeat while doubting them. It refers to the thought beneath thought, the settled conclusion, the assumption that no longer announces itself, the identity-level verdict that feels like reality rather than opinion. The heart is not emotional in the way you were taught. It is regulatory. It is a command center. It does not ask what you want. It broadcasts what you are. And reality, this is the part that feels almost unbelievable, replies like a mirror, not with judgment, not with resistance, but with reflection. You do not attract what you desire. You do not manifest what you visualize. You encounter what matches your internal signal. Identity is frequency. Thought is oath. The heart is transmitter. And the world? The world is obedient. This is where betrayal sets in. Because everything you were taught to rely on, effort, intention, optimism, struggle, exists downstream of this mechanism. You've been trying to edit the reflection without touching the source, trying to rearrange circumstances while the signal remains unchanged. And the law, cold, precise, sacred, has been honoring your broadcast with absolute fidelity. That's why it feels personal. But it isn't. The mirror does not choose what it reflects. It simply reflects. Your income, your relationships, your energy, your sense of limitation or expansion. They are not punishments. They are confirmations. Confirmations of what the heart has already accepted as true. And here comes the most unsettling part. The heart does not respond to what you say you believe. It responds to what you assume without noticing. Assumption is identity's native language. You don't assume what you question. You assume what feels obvious. And what feels obvious to you about your worth, your capacity, your place, has been issuing commands for years, quietly, faithfully. This is why change feels disorienting, because changing identity is not additive, it is subtractive. It requires withdrawing belief from something that once kept you safe. A role, a limitation, a self-definition formed in shadow, and the heart resists, not because it hates you, but because it believes it is protecting you. This law is not cruel, it is exact. And exactness feels cruel when you've been lying to yourself gently. You see it now. The reason reality doesn't respond to desperation is because desperation isn't identity. The reason affirmations collapse is because the heart hears contradiction. The reason effort exhausts you is because effort cannot override command. The command was issued long ago, and the world has been listening ever since. This is why the realization feels like standing naked before something ancient, something that does not explain itself, something that does not bend, only reflects. And as this understanding settles deeper, as the awe replaces denial, another awareness begins to rise. Because if identity is signal, and the heart is the source, then obedience is happening every moment. The question is no longer if you are obeying, it is what. And the law is still watching. There is a strange grief that follows this understanding. Not the grief of loss, but the grief of recognition. Because once you see the mechanism, you cannot unsee it. You begin to notice how automatic your inner world has been. How many conclusions you never consciously chose. How many limitations were inherited, absorbed, accepted, without ceremony. And you realize something chilling. The law was never hidden. It was simply unchallenged. It operated beneath language, beneath education, beneath religion, beneath self-help. It didn't need belief. It didn't need awareness. It needed only consistency. The heart does not require your permission to decide. It requires repetition. Whatever you return to emotionally, whatever feels familiar, whatever you expect without question, that becomes the broadcast, and the world organizes itself with terrifying efficiency, not dramatically, not instantly, gradually. So gradually you mistook obedience for normality. You called it how things are. You called it realistic. You called it just life. But life was never the author. It was the echo. And now something unsettling begins to press against your awareness. Because if the heart is the source, then even your suffering has been coherent. Even your disappointments have made sense. Not morally, but mechanically. They matched the internal image. They upheld the definition. And definitions are powerful. A definition is a boundary with teeth. Once the heart defines who you are, reality enforces the perimeter. Opportunities that don't fit feel uncomfortable. People who see you differently feel suspicious. Paths that contradict the identity feel off, so you retreat. Not because you lack courage, but because the signal demands congruence. The law does not chase you. It does not threaten you. It simply refuses to reflect what you are not aligned with. And this is where awe becomes dread. Because the law does not evolve on its own. It does not improve you. It does not save you. It waits. It waits for the heart to issue a different command. Until then, it will continue responding with precision so exact it feels like fate. This is why spiritual language often fails. People talk about destiny, purpose, blessing, calling, while ignoring the command center issuing contradictory instructions. They pray with the mouth and negate with the heart. They hope with the mind and deny with identity. And the law listens to the deepest voice, always. You can feel the betrayal now, not by the world, but by your assumptions. The idea that effort alone was enough. The idea that suffering was random. The idea that you were waiting for permission. No one was withholding it. You were broadcasting a different message. And that message was received perfectly. This understanding does not bring comfort. It strips it away, because now you see that nothing changes until allegiance changes. Not behavior, not habits, not circumstances. Allegiance, the heart's loyalty to a definition. And here is where the tension sharpens. Because the law has no opinion about whether that definition serves you. It will enforce it, whether it leads to expansion or erosion. It will reflect it, whether it brings life or diminishment. It is not evil. It is exact. And exactness is terrifying when you realize how casually identities are formed. In childhood moments, in humiliations, in comparisons, in survival decisions. Moments where you decided something like, I am the one who people like me don't, this is as far as I go. Those were not thoughts, they were verdicts. And verdicts echo. The realization does not offer escape, only clarity. And clarity is dangerous, because once the mechanism is seen, the silence becomes louder. You start to sense the broadcast beneath every reaction, the assumption beneath every choice, the identity beneath every hesitation. And the question that now vibrates in the chest is not theoretical, it is intimate. If the heart is issuing commands, and the world is obeying without question, then every moment of inattention is still a decision. Every silence is still a signal. Every default is still obedience, and the law does not pause while you think about that. It continues reflecting, relentlessly, faithfully, waiting for the next command to be issued. And if something in you tightened just now, if your breath changed without permission, if a quiet recognition passed through your chest like a shadow, do not dismiss it. That reaction is not curiosity. It is not interest. It is not entertainment. It is recognition. It means the law didn't hit your intellect, it touched your identity. And moments like that are rare, because most of the time the heart remains unobserved, issuing commands uninterrupted, unquestioned, unchallenged. But right now, you are aware, and awareness is not passive. It is an interruption in the signal. So don't stay silent. Silence is how agreements remain intact. If this is landing somewhere deep, if you can feel the old identity shifting uneasily, if something in you is realizing, this has been me, mark it. Not for the algorithm, not for a channel, not for approval, for alignment. Like this video, not as a click, but as a declaration, a signal sent outward that mirrors the one forming inward. Comment what you're realizing, not perfectly, not eloquently. Type it while it's alive, because articulation is allegiance. And subscribe, not as support, but as continuity, as a way of saying, I am no longer agreeing unconsciously. These gestures are not small. They are symbolic acts of obedience redirected. The heart listens to what you repeat, to what you engage, to what you return to. And right now, you are choosing to remain in this frequency. That choice matters more than you think. Because the law is still listening, and what comes next will depend on where your attention swears loyalty. Stay here. The shift has not been explained yet. What happens next is not dramatic. There is no lightning, no catharsis, no triumphant declaration of a new self. In fact, if you are waiting for a feeling of certainty, you will miss it, because the shift does not announce itself as change. It announces itself as hesitation. A pause where there used to be reflex. A moment, barely a second, where the old response does not immediately take the throne. This is where the work actually lives, not in action, not in discipline, not in technique, in allegiance. You begin to notice the instant an old thought tries to settle into the heart. Not the loud ones, not the dramatic ones, the quiet assumptions. Of course, this won't last. This always happens to me. People like me don't. I already know how this ends. These sentences do not arrive as sentences. They arrive as sensations, a sinking, a narrowing, a subtle contraction in the chest. Before you followed that contraction automatically, you mistook it for intuition, for realism, for truth. Now, something different happens, not resistance, awareness. You feel the contraction, and for the first time you do not obey it immediately. This is the pivot, not fighting the thought, not replacing it, not correcting it, simply withholding allegiance, like noticing a command and choosing not to salute. The heart has been trained through repetition. It expects compliance, so when you pause, when you neither agree nor argue, the system destabilizes, not externally, internally. You may feel discomfort, disorientation, a strange emptiness. That is not failure. That is the absence of the old order. You are standing between signals, between identities, and that space feels unsafe because it is unfamiliar. The old identity always offered something, even when it limited you. Predictability, belonging, a story you knew how to survive. Withdrawing obedience feels like betrayal to something that once kept you alive. So the body protests. The mind reaches for explanation. The nervous system seeks the familiar verdict, but you do nothing. You don't rush to define yourself differently. You don't affirm a new image. You simply notice, this thought wants my allegiance, and you don't give it. This is not passivity. It is the most precise form of control there is, because the law does not require you to declare a new identity immediately. It only requires that the old command stop being issued. Signals weaken when they are no longer repeated. Verdicts lose authority when they are no longer believed reflexively. And in this quiet non-agreement, something subtle begins to shift, not yet into clarity, not yet into power, but into openness, a fragile, unstable openness where identity is no longer fixed, where the heart is listening instead of commanding. This is not resolution. This is suspension. And suspension is dangerous because something new can enter. But it hasn't yet, not fully, not safely, because the moment obedience is withdrawn, the heart becomes aware of itself, and that awareness is not comfortable. The next phase does not bring relief, it brings fire, and you are already standing too close to turn away. There is a reason this moment feels exposed, because obedience was never just mental, it was embodied. The old identity lived in posture, in breathing patterns, in how quickly you explained yourself, in how instinctively you shrank or braced or anticipated disappointment. So when you withdraw allegiance, even silently, the body reacts first. A tightening in the stomach, a heat behind the eyes, a subtle urge to do something, anything, to restore the old order. Because the old order, however limiting, was familiar. This is where most people retreat. They misinterpret the discomfort as danger. They assume something has gone wrong. They rush back to the old agreement for relief, and relief comes instantly. That's the trap. But if you stay, if you remain in that suspended moment where the thought has appeared but not been believed, something unusual happens. The thought weakens, not because you fought it, but because you did not feed it. Thoughts draw authority from agreement. Identity draws power from repetition. Without obedience, the verdict begins to dissolve. And in its absence, you start to sense something beneath the noise. Not a new identity yet, Not confidence, not certainty, but choice. Raw, unsettling choice. The realization that identity is not something you discover, it is something you authorize, moment by moment, agreement by agreement. This is why the shift feels almost illegal, as if you are breaking an unspoken rule, as if you are betraying a role you were never officially assigned, but always enforced. The heart notices this. It grows alert. It begins listening instead of declaring. And listening feels like vulnerability. Because now, without the old verdict, you are not protected by limitation. You are not hidden by expectation. You are exposed to possibility. And possibility is terrifying when you are no longer pretending it isn't meant for you. This is why no technique is offered here. No steps, no rituals, no affirmations. Because any method that rushes to replace the old identity too quickly only installs another mask. The real shift is slower, more precise. It is the recognition, again and again, of the moment obedience is requested, and the quiet decision to delay, to breathe, to stay present, to not collapse into the familiar sentence. That delay is everything, because during that delay, the law is still operating, but the signal is unstable, and instability is the doorway. You may feel grief here. Grief for how long you lived under a verdict you never questioned. Grief for the self you defended, even as it confined you. Let it rise. Grief is not weakness. It is the nervous system releasing an expired contract. And still, nothing is resolved. You are not new. You are undefined. And undefined feels dangerous to a system trained on certainty. But something else is also happening. A low, quiet sense of power. Not the power of assertion. The power of non-compliance. You are learning that you do not have to argue with the old identity. You only have to stop agreeing with it. And in that subtle refusal, reality begins to hesitate too. Not visibly. Not yet. But the mirror is waiting. Waiting for clarity. Waiting for the next instruction. And now, because obedience has been interrupted, the heart is no longer certain what to say. That silence is not empty. It is charged. And what begins to form inside it will not resemble who you've been. But it hasn't taken shape yet, because before identity can be rewritten, it must first become unstable. And instability is where the fire lives. This is where the ground begins to move, not outwardly, inwardly. You start to notice yourself noticing. The pause arrives faster now. The contraction still appears, but it no longer completes its cycle automatically. Something in you is watching the reflex instead of being swallowed by it. And that watcher, that presence, is unfamiliar. It does not rush to explain. It does not rush to define. It does not rush to conclude. It observes. This is the beginning of a different identity, not declared, not claimed, not performed, but felt. You are no longer the one who believes every thought that enters the heart. You are no longer the one who mistakes emotional familiarity for truth. You are no longer the one who collapses into old definitions without seeing the moment it happens. You become the one who catches it. And catching it changes everything. Because identity was never a single statement. It was a pattern of unnoticed agreements. Now those agreements are exposed. You feel them forming in real time. The urge to downplay yourself before someone else does. The instinct to expect disappointment before it arrives. The reflex to shrink desire before it can hurt you. But instead of obeying, you notice. Instead of merging, you pause. And that pause begins to feel powerful. Not loud power, not dominance. A quiet, internal authority. The authority to interrupt. This is what destabilizes the old self. Because the old self depended on speed, on automation, on unconscious loyalty. Without that speed, it cannot fully form. You are not becoming confident. You are becoming conscious. And consciousness is destabilizing to any identity built on assumption. You start to sense how often you used to disappear into roles. The agreeable one, the invisible one, the responsible one. The one who doesn't ask for too much. Roles you once wore without noticing. Now they feel heavy, constraining. You don't reject them dramatically. You simply stop inhabiting them completely, and that partial withdrawal creates friction inside you. and outside you. People may feel it before you name it, a slight unpredictability, a hesitation where compliance used to live, a presence where silence used to fill the space. You haven't changed your personality, you've changed your allegiance. And allegiance is what reality responds to. But this phase is not comfortable, because the old identity does not dissolve quietly. It questions you, it warns you, it tells you that you're becoming reckless, arrogant, unsafe. Not because it's evil, because it is losing jurisdiction, and loss of control feels like danger to a system designed for survival. You feel this as inner tension, as moments where you almost snap back into the familiar self. As thoughts like, "Who do you think you are? This isn't you, you're overreaching." Those thoughts are not obstacles, they are symptoms, symptoms of a verdict being renegotiated. And here is the strange truth. You are not replacing one identity with another. You are becoming the one who decides. Decides what gets believed, decides what gets repeated, decides what gets authority. That is a volatile position, because once you see this mechanism, you cannot unsee it. Every moment becomes charged. Every reaction becomes a choice point. And the self that emerges here is not polished, not finished, not safe. It is unstable, potent, alive. You are not certain who you are becoming, only who you are no longer willing to be automatically. And that uncertainty, that open-endedness is both terrifying and electric, because the mirror is still reflecting. But now, it's waiting, and what it will reflect next has not yet been decided. There is a moment, quiet, almost imperceptible, when you realize the old identity no longer fits, not because it has disappeared, but because you can feel the seams. What once felt natural now feels rehearsed. What once felt just who I am now feels like something you're stepping into rather than living from. And that realization is destabilizing. Because identities are supposed to feel invisible. They are meant to feel like truth, not costume. Yet here you are, sensing the edges. You notice how quickly the old self wants to explain, justify, apologize. How it rushes to restore familiarity when uncertainty appears. How it tries to convince you that awareness is arrogance, that pause is danger, that change is betrayal. But you don't fully believe it anymore. And that partial disbelief is enough to fracture the structure. You begin to live in a strange in-between state, not free, not trapped, present, hyper-aware of the moment identity tries to crystallize. You catch yourself mid-sentence, mid-reaction, mid-assumption, and sometimes you stop, not to perform a better version of yourself, but to remain undefined a second longer. That extra second is revolutionary, because in that second, the heart has not yet issued a command, and without a command, the law waits. You start to feel the rawness of this position. Without the old identity, there is no script, no guarantee of approval, no predictable outcome. You are exposed. And exposure feels like danger to a system trained on survival. So fear arises, but it is a different kind of fear. Not the fear of failure, the fear of becoming visible to your own potential. Because now, without the old definition limiting the mirror, you sense that reality could respond differently, and that possibility is heavier than disappointment ever was. Disappointment, you knew how to survive. Expansion, that demands responsibility. So the old identity makes one final offer: come back. This is safer, and for a moment you consider it, because safety is seductive when instability burns. But something has shifted too far. You have seen the mechanism. You have felt the pause. You know now that obedience is a choice, not a destiny. And that knowledge cannot be unlearned. So instead of returning fully, you hover between agreement and refusal, between definition and openness. This hovering becomes your new posture, not certainty, attentiveness. You become someone who listens inwardly, not for guidance, but for commands. And when a command arises, you feel it, you test it, you ask, without words, is this who I am, or who I was? That question alone begins to reshape you, because identities cannot survive interrogation. They survive only assumption, and assumption has been interrupted. You are not empowered in the way motivational language describes. You are unsettled, alert, awake. And that awakening carries a strange heat, a sense that something powerful is forming, but not yet contained, because the heart is still learning that it no longer speaks unchallenged, and the law is still listening, waiting for coherence, waiting for a signal strong enough to reflect. And right now, you are in flux, not broken, not complete, unstable in the most dangerous way possible. Because instability is where creation begins, and the mirror has not finished responding yet. There is no ending here, only a quiet intensification. Because once the heart becomes aware of itself, it does not return to sleep easily. You may walk away from this moment, you may distract yourself, you may resume familiar routines. But something has shifted beneath language. A subtle listening has begun. You will notice it later, when a thought tries to settle too quickly, when an old conclusion reaches for authority, when the familiar sentence begins to form in your chest. And there will be a pause, not forced, not dramatic. A pause where the heart hesitates. That hesitation is everything. Because in that hesitation, obedience is undecided. The old identity will still whisper. It will still offer certainty, protection, familiarity. But now, it is no longer alone. Awareness is present, and awareness does not argue. It watches. It notices how quickly the heart wants to conclude, how eagerly it wants to define, how desperately it wants to restore the known shape of you. And in that noticing, something profound occurs. The heart realizes it is being observed, not judged, not attacked, observed. And observation changes behavior. You may not feel powerful, you may not feel free, you may not feel transformed. That is not the point. The point is that the command center is no longer unchallenged. The law is still operating, the mirror is still reflecting, but the signal is unstable, unfinished, alive. You are no longer obeying blindly. You are no longer agreeing automatically. You are no longer invisible to yourself. And that awareness does not resolve into comfort. It opens into mystery. Because now the question is not how do I change my life? The question is quieter, more dangerous. What am I agreeing to right now? The heart is listening. The law is listening. And somewhere between them, a new identity is forming. Not declared, not rushed, not named, only sensed, breathing, waiting. Do not rush to answer. The silence itself is doing something, and it has only just begun.